Hello, everybody. I think we have most folks, so we'll go ahead and get started. Um, so hello, everybody. Happy 2025. Happy New Year. We hope everybody had a restful break. Hope you're kind of getting back into the swing of things. So just to start, we'll do introductions and things in a moment, but in case anybody is new to our customer success webinar series, we do these webinars about once a month on kind of key topics that we at CourseDog think would benefit our customers, either to help you kind of get the most out of your products, mastering important concepts, helping you with troubleshooting or preempting any issues that you may encounter. That's really the goal of these webinars, and we try and host broad topics across different products all the time so that you can kind of always be picking and choosing. Just as a kind of reminder for folks, is the intended audience for these webinars are mostly for your CourseDog super admins or your administrators, the folks that are kind of in CourseDog and doing configurations, maybe folks that were part of your implementation or folks that are maintaining kind of your CourseDog system moving forward. However, of course, if you're not a super admin, or if you're not super duper in the weeds and you're more of like a power user or functional user, totally okay. You can still be here. You should hopefully still get something out of this webinar. But just wanted to kind of make that note right out of the gate. So then diving into what we're going to be talking about today, we're going to be talking about the new phases and new term scheduling process that is going to be coming to academic scheduling in our February product release. This has already been released in staging environments for most customers. So hopefully this shouldn't be super duper new, but we wanted to use this webinar as an opportunity to walk folks through the new functionality, what the changes are, and just help y'all understand kind of how things are going to look moving forward. So we'll do some brief introductions. I'll introduce myself. Brian will introduce himself as well. We'll walk you through what's changing, what the new functionality is, give you an in-app demo, and then talk through some kind of next steps, how you can prepare for this rollout in February. And then of course, we'll try and save time at the end for questions. We'll be monitoring the Q&A here in the webinar. So as we're going through, if you have questions, feel free to drop them in there. So after talking for a few minutes, to introduce ourselves, my name is Katelyn Fadeev. I'm the manager of customer success here at CourseDog. So I oversee our team of customer success managers. I've been at CourseDog for almost 4 years now. Previously, I was a project manager, senior project manager on our implementations team. So somewhat new to our customer success side of the house, but really, really excited to help everybody get the most value out of our products. And with that, I'll hand it over to Brian.
Yeah, thanks, Katelyn. Hi, folks. I'm Brian Smith. I'm the product manager for scheduling and also events and faculty workload management at CourseDog. So I've been here for about 2.5 years and see a lot of familiar names in the crowd here. So looking forward to sharing this new process with you all. Thanks.
So to dive right in, we'll walk through just first at a high level. I'll kind of explain what the goals of all the changes that are being made are, and then Brian will walk you through those changes in more detail. But what we're going to be rolling out is a new phase UI. We're also going to be rolling out a new timeline UI, so what was previously future actions. And then part of this rollout is also making your new term setup process in CourseDog that much easier. So Brian, if you want to move on to the next slide, I can kind of talk through the goals. But yeah, like I said, these new configuration changes are really meant to streamline your new term setup process. So depending on how long you've been a partner with us, you may have seen iterations of this over time. We have been working over the last several years to make new term setup as seamless and easy as possible. It's something you do multiple times a year, and we want to make that simple. And so all of the changes that we're going to be rolling out are meant to try and kind of simplify. We're trying to improve our phase functionality to make it more of a one-stop shop for doing your new term configuration prep, And also, making the process of getting a new terms data from your SIS into CourseDog that much easier. And so with that, I'll hand it over to Brian, who's going to kind of walk through the details.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Caitlin. So we'll go through a few of the changes here, both at a high level and then feature by feature in individual slides. And then we will also go through a full demo of everything that's being changed here. So Caitlin already said it really well. Overall, we're just trying to help make the new term process easier for you, provide a better phases experience, and bring as much configuration into one place as possible, so you don't have to go back and forth and remember a bunch of different steps to manage your scheduling cycle and to get the new term started. So at the top here, you'll see controlling configurations in phases. We want to bring as much as possible into your phases interface so you don't have to, like I just said, jump back and forth between different parts of the app to manage your phases. So we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk about timeline items, which timeline actions, which used to be future actions. That's really just moved locations to make it easier to find. You'll have all the same functionality there. So again, just trying to make the interface and the experience of navigating the app a little bit easier. And then we've changed the way that we're asking you all to deal with your merge settings. So we're going to automate some of the new term setup process and the way it interacts with your merge settings. And we'll talk through that. The overall goal is to ask you all to make fewer changes each time a new term begins and to make it a more seamless experience where we're doing a lot of the term setup and kind of recognition of when we need to run merges for you. We'll go through that process from end to end in just a little bit. So let me jump ahead and we'll start with the new phases interface. Again, we will definitely demo this live in the app. Just want to call out a few of the most important updates here. So first is the new phases interface. So first of all, hopefully it looks a little bit different and it's just nicer to work with overall. You're also getting an assigned terms section of the overview page where you'll be able to see for any given phase what terms are associated with that phase. This used to require you to jump back to the phases list. So we've just brought a little bit more information into the specific phase for easier reference. You're also going to have a compare phases option, and we'll walk through this where you can surface 3 different phases and just compare the changes you're making in each phase, just to make it easier for you to say, oh, did I make the changes in the right order? Are we making the correct changes as we move through the scheduling cycle in a way that's a little bit easier to visually understand instead of jumping phase to phase to identify all of those changes. Then there's a baseline feature within each of the tabs. Let me not try to explain this until I can actually show it to you all, but it will help identify what your baseline settings are for a specific item. And we've also added the section rules tab to the phases interface. So section rules are now controlled within phases, and we're going to cover that in a lot of detail coming up here. We can dive into it right here, actually. So managing section rules within phases. Previously, in the old setup, your section rules had a setting called allowed phases, where you were able to say for a specific rule, which phases is it allowed to be active in? Meaning, I'm going to set the baseline configuration for my rule. If it's active in a specific phase, this rule will apply. If it's not assigned to a phase, it's not going to apply to that phase at all. That worked, but it didn't make a lot of sense to set that up in section rules when it really is a phase-specific configuration. And what you're really trying to do as you move through your phases is to say, all right, in phase 1, I want this rule to apply. In phase 2, I don't. Or maybe in phase 2, I want it to apply, but in a different way than it will in phase 3. And that's the configuration that we brought into phases here. Try to make it a little bit easier to visualize and manage your section rules from the phases interface. And again, we'll go through this in more detail in our demo and happy to answer any questions about that. All right, next piece here. We've actually removed the editable by term setting from your section template. This was rarely used, but we have some of our partners who use it pretty heavily. If you do use it heavily, you have received communications from your CSM or your PM, and we've maybe already met with you to work around this or have a meeting scheduled to help you reconfigure some things. But the idea here was that we're removing any configuration that is very specific to a term when it's something that can be managed in phases. And often we will see customers have, one or two of these field settings applied. It's actually very easy to forget that it exists at all and run into a problem down the line. Why can I edit this field in this term? Oh, it's because I set this editable by terms option way back in implementation and forgot about it. And we would rather have you all set this up in your phases configuration and manage it there. Next piece here is future actions. So like I mentioned, future actions are becoming timeline items, but most importantly, they're really just moving from one place to another. They used to live within your roles tab. So if you can see this little red box here, they now live in the timeline tab of your settings. They used to live within the roles tab, within another tab that was sometimes just difficult to remember where it even lived. So we placed that in its own tab, and we've removed the ability to edit permissions from within your timeline actions. So previously, you could configure something in phases that you could then overwrite in your timeline, in your future actions. That was very confusing, very difficult to track, and would often lead to tickets where we would see that, oh, it's just a kind of a duplicate configuration here, but it's very hard to remember and not the most intuitive way to deal with your role permissions. So we've just removed that option, and now all of your role permissions will be managed from your phase configuration. So again, just anything we're doing here is really trying to make the scheduling cycle management and maintenance process easier for our partners, rather than asking you to have to go remember many different places in the app and many different configurations and make sure they're working in order. Oh, sorry, and I see a comment in the chat about my sound. Let me try one other thing, and let's hope this improves it.
Okay, I apologize. I hope folks can hear me more clearly. If not, please let me know. Sorry about that. Okay. Thank you, Julie, for flagging that. I appreciate it. And if anything, like if y'all couldn't hear anything, please let me know. We'll go back and cover it, but we'll also double click on all of this in the demo. Okay, now let's talk about a really core part of this update that's going to affect the way that phases, terms, and merges interact. So before we've rolled out this functionality, the way that a new term would be set up is you would place a term into a phase. You would go to your merge settings and make sure that you have applied to all of your scheduling objects the new term as a term for which merges can be run. So make a change in your phases settings, your term settings, go into your merge settings, make another change there, make sure nothing is overlapping, make sure everything is working correctly, and merges will begin running for that term. That can be a confusing process. It's taking you into merge settings, which can be a confusing place in their own right. And our goal here is to make the new term setup as simple as possible and something that can happen in as few clicks as possible. So the new relationship here is that in order for a term to have merges running, you need to place the term in a phase that has a save state assigned to it where merges are on. Most of our partners have one or two save states. If it's one, that's the save state where merges are on. If it's a second, it's very rarely used. So just think of your default primary save state. What needs to happen is that that save state needs to be applied to a phase and to any phase where you want merges to be running. So you may have a 5-phase scheduling cycle. Phase 0, which is some pre-configuration phase where you're just setting things up for the term. Phases 1, 2, 3, and 4, where merges should be running and you're actively making your edits. And then maybe a final phase that's just archived, where you don't need to run merges for a term any longer. In that scenario, the new setup would be you take your default save state where merges are on and apply it to those phases 1, 2, 3, and 4 where merges are running. As soon as you place a term into term 0, you can move it into phase 1 using your timeline items, or if you manually move your terms through phases, great. Place it in phase 0, merges won't run. When you're ready for merges to begin running, place it in phase 1. As soon as you place it in phase 1, CourseDog will now recognize that that term is in a phase that has a save state where merges are on, and merges will begin running. You no longer need to go to your merge settings and manually add that term. We will recognize that for you and begin running your merges straight away. So that is the new interaction between phases, terms, and your merge settings save states. And we'll go through this in a live example here in just a little bit. But please, if you do have questions about that, throw them into the chat or into the QA, and we'll review and make sure we address them. Okay, here's just what we hope is a nice visualization of what the old new term process and the updated new term process looked like. In the old process, what would be required to set up a new term in scheduling is go to your merge settings, which are now the integrations hub, update your merge settings to include the term for each item where you want to run merges. So this could be relationships, scheduling courses, and scheduling sections. Run the manual merges. We didn't talk too much about that so far, but that was also an important step of the process. Then you're able to begin running your merges for the new term. Moving forward, all you need to do is assign, place your term in the first phase of your scheduling cycle. We'll go through the steps to actually do that, and wait for a nightly merge. Once you have your term in your phases, we can move you through those phases via timeline items. You also have the option to manually do that. But the most important step is get your term in the right phase to kick off your scheduling cycle. And as far as merges are concerned, we will do the rest. So we really want to reduce the number of steps required for you all to tackle that process. Okay. So we've talked about it a little bit, and let's actually take a look at how this is all going to work. So let me just pull up a couple of demo environments here, and we will go through this. So I'm going to, in a couple of places, just point out the old setup. I'm going to try to focus on how things work moving forward, but there are a couple key places where I want to point out some changes here. Just note this tab here, K9 College, is the old setup. Brian's school is the new setup. So I will try to call it out. I'm only going to do this once or twice, but just please keep that in mind here. And let me just check the chat and see if there's anything I can answer. Okay, we'll circle back to a couple of these. Let's start with the phases interface. This is the old version. This is the new version. So a little bit cleaner. We've separated your role permissions, your field permissions, your section rules, and your merge settings configurations into separate tabs to make navigation easier and to make things a little bit easier on the eye. So that's an important difference between the new setup and the old setup. In your new phases interface, you're going to have this compare phases option where you can select 2 or 3 phases and compare them. In this case, I haven't made very many changes here. This would give you an easy way to check, all right, for my role permissions, in my first phase, I haven't made a change. In my second phase, I have changed this permission to allow. And in my third phase, I've turned it back off. So just an easy way to track across your phases what the changes that you've actually made are. Okay, let's dive back into phases and let's talk about section rules. Sorry, before we do that, I want to talk about the baseline setting here. So I'm going to add a new role permission that I would like to edit. I'm going to make add courses deny for CourseDog users in this phase. As soon as I do that, I see the baseline option pop up here. And what this is telling me is, what is my baseline setting for this role permission? My baseline setting is that CourseDog users can add courses. So when I create this deny action, I now know that I'm moving away from the baseline configuration, which is probably what I want to do. But if I were in here and selecting allow, that's not needed. That's the baseline. So just use this as a reminder of what you're moving away from or moving back to as you configure your role permissions and your field permissions. Okay. I'm going to jump back to the old setup one more time and point out what I mentioned already with section rules, where in a given section rule, there was an allowed phases option here, where you were able to select a phase to which this rule would apply. If you didn't select any phase, the rule would apply to all phases. But as soon as you select a phase, this means that this rule applies to phase 3, but does not apply to any of your other phases. It's only on in this given phase. What we've done is we've taken that setting and we've moved it into the section rules tab of your phases interface. So now let's say you have a rule that by default is off, but you reach the pre-scheduling phase, you reach phase 4 of your scheduling cycle, and what you would like to do is turn it on. Select the rule that you're looking for. Let's have it trigger a warning and also make it a rule that can't be violated. Now you've turned your rule on for this phase. So you can keep it off by default and turn it on in a given phase. Alternatively, it might be a rule that you want on by default. A good example might be the double booked instructor rule. That's probably something you want on for most of your scheduling cycle, but maybe in an archived phase or very early in the scheduling cycle, you want to turn it off. Great. Turn it off. Well, I don't want to do that. I want to turn it off. Now, when I hit this specific phase, that rule will not be triggered. So it's just a way to place that same set of configuration actions you had by selecting a phase in the section rule into your phases interface so you can control it in the phase itself and bring more of that maintenance into one place. Okay.
Brian, can I make one additional call out here for folks? The other thing to note with the movement of section rule configs into the phases rather than that allowed phases filter is now you have a lot more customization available to you on how rules behave across phases. So previously in the old setup, if I had a given rule turned on for phases 2 and 3, I had to say that, in both of those phases, it was a warning or it went through a rule exception. With this new configuration, you can actually be more granular and you can say, in phase 2, I want this rule to trigger a warning. In phase 3, I want this rule to trigger the user to submit a rule exception request. So you have a lot more flexibility now than you did before to really go phase by phase, have those rules behave differently.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you, Katelyn. Great call out there. And a question I'm seeing in the chat from Melissa, if you don't add a specific rule, is it by default off? No, by default, it is set to the configuration you've created in your section rules settings. So when I come into my section rules here, and I open up the section rule, this is your default setting. If you do not apply a change to this default setting in a phase, we just take the default setting. So it will act like this, can be violated, but does trigger a warning throughout your phases until I go into a phase, select that same rule and say, oh, actually, in this case, I don't want it to be violated at all. So it's only when you make a change in a phase that we change the baseline behavior. Okay, great question. Thanks, Melissa. Okay, let us now talk about this merge settings, save state to phases to term interaction here. So I'm going to open up a phase. I'm going to go to the merge settings configuration tab here. What this tab is telling CourseDog is which merge settings save state would I like to use in this phase. And you'll see a really important note here. If no merge setting save state is selected, the integration will not run for terms assigned to this phase. So you may create those 5 phases or those 6 phases, not assign a save state to any of those phases. By default, merges are not running for any term. A term could be placed in any of those phases. There's no save state applied. Merges aren't going to run. What I've done here in pre-scheduling is I've selected the save state that I've called on. There's all sorts of different naming conventions that you may be using. But for the sake of this example, I have two save states. I have on and off. What I want to do in pre-scheduling is I want my merges to run for a term that's placed in this pre-scheduling phase. So what I've done is I've said, all right, I want the merge setting save state where merges are running, which I've named on, to apply. I apply that merge setting save state to this phase. When it comes time for a term to begin, I'm using an old term here, but let's say it's spring 2020. I'll come into my term settings. I will find the first phase of my scheduling cycle, which in this case is pre-scheduling, and I'm going to select it. What's happened now is that this term is assigned to the first phase of my scheduling cycle. There could be a phase before pre-scheduling that I use, but in this case, pre-scheduling is the first phase of the scheduling cycle. As soon as that happens, and we'll open up that phase just to illustrate one more thing, which is that spring 2020 is now assigned to this phase. As soon as spring 2020 is in a phase where the merge setting save state has merges running, which in this case is on, merges begin running. Until this term hits a phase with merge setting save state, with a merge setting save state that is running merges, merges will not be running. So this gives you the ability to set up your timeline items or just use that manual movement of terms through phases like I just demoed right here. Come into your terms, select your phase to allow CourseDog to handle the merge settings. Just put your term in your phase. We will know if a phase should be running merges, and we'll start running merges for that term. Until you've hit a phase with merge settings on, we will skip merges for that term, and we won't run any merges in that case. So that's the new kind of interaction and flow between those different actions there. And we're going to talk a little bit about where different groups of partners stand. Some of you all have worked with your customer success managers to make some changes. Some of you all have very few configuration changes to make. And some of you all have already made those changes and are all set moving forward. So we're going to talk a little bit more about what's happening next. But this is a good stopping point. Let me pause here, and can I take any questions about anything I just walked through there?
Brian, we got a question in the Q&A from Vicky, who said, it sounds like I need to go back into my old phases and change the save state to stop merges for older terms. I can take a crack at answering it. And the answer to that is kind of maybe, and we'll talk through recommendations in terms of configs you may want to make in preparation. But yeah, if there are terms that are come and gone, they're kind of historical, you've archived them, you're not working in them anymore, they no longer need to be integrated. If those terms are currently assigned to a phase, and you go into your CourseDog environment and assign merge settings to that phase, then yes, what that would ultimately end up doing is including all of those terms in your merge settings moving forward. So you kind of have two options on how to handle that. One is you can simply remove those terms from a phase. So if a term is not assigned to a phase at all in CourseDog, that now means that term isn't part of your merges. That's kind of the easiest option. The other option is if, say, you have all of those historical terms assigned to an archive phase in CourseDog, all you really need to do is just not assign merge settings to that archive phase. And then again, that way, because those terms are assigned to a phase with no merge settings, then those terms won't get added back into your integration. We'll talk about that hopefully a little bit more, a little bit later on. I hope that makes sense. And all that to say as well, if anybody has questions about any of these things, or you're not sure what to do, we have some recommendations we'll talk through in a little bit, but you can always reach out to your customer success manager, and they're here to guide you if you need it.
Yeah, thank you, Caitlin. And this, there are definitely lots of ways to move ahead here with altering your configuration, and the end goal is for this to be some one-time reconfiguration work for many terms of very easy new term setup process. So that's the goal here. Okay. We'll let questions keep coming in, and we can tackle them as they come in or at the end when we save some time for QA. But that's really the bulk of what I wanted to make sure to cover in a live environment here. So let's jump back to the deck for a brief second. We took some time for questions. Let's talk through just a visualization of what the new term process is going to look like. So this applies mostly to any of our partners who maybe you haven't been using phases in any way, or haven't set up a save state previously, which is something your DE probably has already supported you with or can support you with. But if you have a configuration where a phase didn't exist, or you're unfamiliar with save states, the most important thing to know going forward is that in scheduling, you should have one phase. Reason for having one phase is we need that phase to have a save state applied to it so that we can recognize when to run merges. So you do need one phase in scheduling. And if you have only one phase, that phase needs a save state. If you have multiple phases, you need at least one phase with a save state assigned to it. Again, reason being, we need a phase with a save state applied to it where merges are running in order for a term to hit a phase where merges are running and for merges to run to that term. If those conditions don't exist, a term could go all the way through the scheduling cycle and merges will not run. So we just need to match up that save state with the phase with the term and begin running merges. What that means, again, for the new process is take your phase, take your term, place it into the phase that starts your scheduling cycle, and you're done. Don't worry about going into your merge settings and setting up term-specific settings. We'll take it the rest of the way and move you through your scheduling cycle. Okay, let's talk about some next steps. And Caitlin, I'll throw it back to you.
So I do see just a message from Christine about having more than one save state. Yes, you can. Some customers do have more than one integration save state that may have been configured, as you went through maybe implementations of multiple products. You may have different merge settings that were created as you went through your journey with us. In those cases, we have some recommendations for you on kind of what to do. And ultimately, like I said before, is if you're unsure about anything or you have any questions, you can always reach out to your customer success manager and they can give you some guidance. But hopefully if we kind of walk through the recommendations that that we've got here, that can clarify for you what you need to do. So yeah, if you want to, to start with, yeah, in terms of kind of timing, for most customers, like we mentioned at the top of the call, you would have received these new features in your staging environment as part of our January release that happened on the 8th. So hopefully you should have seen like the new timeline and the new phases UI. You should have seen all of those things in your staging environment. We do have a handful of customers that are operating on a little bit of a different schedule due to, maybe some more complex configurations that we wanted to guide through. So if you're one of those folks where, you didn't see this in your staging environment on the 8th, fear not, your CSM either has been in touch with you or will continue to reach out to you to make sure that you're set up for success. And then the expectation is that all of these features are going to be available in production as part of our February release on February 5th. So in a couple of weeks, all of these new features will be in production. And so in order to prepare for this, as we've mentioned kind of throughout this webinar, there are a couple of configuration changes that we highly recommend customers do. They are configurations that you can do anytime. You don't need to wait for the new feature releases to be in place to make the changes that we're recommending. So you can make those changes in your staging environment now with the new feature UI there. And you could also make these changes in the old UI that's currently in production. Primarily, the changes that we're recommending for folks to make mostly applies to our integrated customers. So if you are a non-integrated customer or you are a CSV customer, so your data gets in and out of CourseDog through CSVs, some of the things that we're about to cover obviously are not going to apply in the sense that you don't have merge settings, you don't have a save state, you don't necessarily need to worry about an integration running or not running. So just keep that in mind. Ultimately, like I said before, if you're not sure if you're an integrated customer or non-integrated customer, you can always reach out to your CSM and they can help you out and give you some clarity. So as Brian kind of already mentioned, the three main things that we highly recommend you update in your CourseDog staging and production environments ahead of the production release is if you don't have phases configured in scheduling today, we recommend creating at least one phase. You know, I think for the most part, most of our partners have phases configured in scheduling. I think we only have a handful that didn't have any phases. But if you're in that camp of you currently don't have any phases, for now, the recommendation is just create a single phase, call it open scheduling. You don't need to make any field permission, role permission, section rule changes if you don't want to. Of course, if you want to build out more phases, you certainly can, but we really recommend having at least one. If you've already got phases, you're good. The next piece is assigning merge settings to your phases. And like we've mentioned, this is how CourseDog is going to know moving forward whether or not a term should be part of your, nightly and real-time merges. So for the phases where you want that integration to be running, go ahead and assign your merge settings to those phases. Again, you can do that in the old UI in production now. You can do it in the new UI and staging now. And our recommendation for now is to assign your default merge settings to those phases. So if you are a customer that has more than one integration save state, you have more than one set of merge settings. Our recommendation is to just apply the merge settings that are currently enabled in your environment to your phases. If you're not sure which integration save state is the one that's running, you can always go into the integrations hub to see which save state is the one that you're currently using. If you have trouble, you don't know where to find it, again, you can always reach out to your CSM and they can tell you which one you need to use. And then lastly, once you've assigned merge settings to those phases, you'll just want to make sure that you have your terms assigned to phases. Primarily, the focus is any terms that you want to make sure are part of your integration. So terms that you want to make sure are running real time and nightly, you'll want to make sure that they're assigned to a phase moving forward with this new functionality. So if I added, say, Spring 26 term to my merge settings in the integrations hub or in the old admin panel last week, but the Spring 26 term is not currently assigned to a phase in CourseDog, when this gets rolled out, that term will get removed from your integration. It won't run anymore. So that's where we just want to make sure you're assigning those terms that need to be integrated to a phase. And then additionally, if you have a phase where you assign merge settings and you've got a ton of old terms assigned to that phase and you're like, oh geez, I don't want all those terms added to my merge settings, I would say either remove merge settings from that phase or remove the terms from the phase. Or if all of that is too much and you're just overwhelmed and you're not sure what to do, reach out to your customer success manager and they're here to help. All right. So that's everything that we had for today. I know it was a lot of information. We know that the feature spotlight that went out had quite a bit of information as well. So we hope this session was helpful to visualize and maybe just kind of hear the same information in a different way. But we'll leave some time now to answer any questions that anybody may have. Feel free to drop them in the Q&A, and we can answer them.
And I did have responded to a question from Wanda already, but it was a good question about save states in staging and production. So those save states are something that your data engineer would have set up for you in implementation. They may have different names in staging and in production. So if you have any questions, or we've seen cases where there's a default and a default version 2, just reach out to your CSM or your PM or your data engineer, and we can answer the question for you about, are these aligned or which one should I really be using? But when in doubt, your default save state should have merges running, but definitely reach out and we can check and see what the right option to select would be.
Also, I've seen a couple notes in our chat. The link to this webinar recording will be shared with everybody afterwards. So this will be made available. A link to it will be in our knowledge base. And we'll also, you should, I think, receive an email from Cassie, the course dog, in a day or two with a link to the webinar recording for reference. And then I do see Sheldon asked a question. So if I'm right in the middle of open draft scheduling right now for a spring quarter, should I make a new phase and put my term in it? Short answer, yes. So if you have a term that you're scheduling right now and you want to make sure that those updates are being synced with the SIS, you want to make sure that that term is assigned to a phase and that phase has merge settings assigned to it. And that's something that you can set up now in preparation for this release that's coming on February 5th. And again, if you're unsure of what to do or you need some recommendations, reach out to your CSM and they're happy to hop on a call and walk you through it.
Another question from Callie: do the future actions that are built out currently, do they transfer to timeline items? Yes, so everything will transfer over to your new timeline tab. There is one thing to look out for. Let me actually just point this out because this can be a little bit tricky. When you first dive into your timeline tab here, you may think, uh-oh, I've lost some future actions. Not the case. Not the case. They may just be past items. So make sure to select that, and any past items will also appear, but everything will port over into your timeline tab.
And similarly, just to cover all of our bases, any existing phases or phase configurations that you have in CourseDog will get ported over. So if you have your phases built out and you have those field permission settings and those role permission setting changes that are built out in those phases in CourseDog, that will all get migrated over to the new phase UI. Really, the only thing that's kind of different and new is the section rule configuration within phases. And again, if you were a school that was using those allowed phase filters on any of your section rules, your CSM should have reached out to you to either give you a configuration guide on how to reconfigure those in the new UI, or would have met with you over the last couple of weeks to guide you through that as well. So if you didn't hear from your CSM and get that configuration guide on how to redo those section rules, then it means that you don't have any allowed phases applied to your section rules and you're good to go. Same thing with the editable by term config. If you were using that editable by term setting on any of your fields on your section template, you would have heard from your CSM and they would have set up time with you to talk through it to reconfigure it. So if you didn't hear from your CSM, you're safe to know that you don't have any of those configurations in your section template right now.
Another question on timeline items. Yes, there's definitely a way to just reuse your timeline items. Let me actually just start from scratch here, and I'm going to create a new one. We'll just call this test, and it occurs on a specific date. I'm going to select all terms. I'm going to add this item. When it comes time for a new term to begin, and I need this action to happen on January 2nd, 2026, I can certainly just go in and change the date, no problem. Another option I have is to duplicate this item and just move the new item to January 2nd, 2026. Both options work. It really depends if you would like to preserve the old one for any reason. Maybe you need to, in the new term, not send the email that you sent previously. And so you don't want to duplicate it. You want to create a new one. Or maybe you do want to reuse your timeline item. You have both options, but either just by editing directly or by duplicating, you can set things up for the new term. And then,
Yeah, we have a question from Patty of where's the timeline? I don't see it. So the new timeline menu item, you'll see it in your staging environment. You will not see it in production yet. That new timeline menu item and the migration of your future actions over there will be available in production on February 5th.
okay. Any other questions we can answer? One new one here from Stephanie. If we're not seeing the timeline in our staging environment yet, should we reach out to your CSM? Yes, feel free to do that. That's probably because your CSM has already reached out to someone on your team to set up some time to make these changes for you. But yes, feel free to reach out to them. And if they haven't been in touch, then they will definitely set up some time. Okay, well, if those are all the questions, I think we can, oh, one more, good. If we have previous terms marked historical, do we still need to update their phases to keep them from adding to the merges? So with historical terms, marking a term historical does not change behavior as it relates to merges. So you will want to treat historical terms as any other term in the sense of put them in your archive phase. Make sure they're not assigned to a phase that has merges running. Otherwise, even though they are marked historical, there is no change in behavior as it relates to phases and merges.
And that's one in particular. If you're a school that has a lot of terms that are marked historical right now in CourseDog, or you've got a handful of historical terms that are currently assigned to a phase, and you're not quite sure what to do, again, that's another example. I would highly recommend reaching out to your CSM, just even as a gut check to say, hey, I think I need, this is what I planned on doing. Am I correct? Or if you have concerns, if you have, a significant volume of historical terms that you're concerned about, making the changes for, your CSM is available to help you out and see if there's anything we can do on our end to make that simpler for you. And then also, there is a question from Sheldon around the admin portal. So yeah, one of the, this kind of goes along with the rollout of our integrations hub, which you should have seen get rolled out in CourseDog over the last month or so. And so our legacy admin panel, which you all may have been familiar with, is going away and being replaced with our new integrations hub. So yes, you should see the old admin panel go away if it hasn't already been removed from your CourseDog environments. And additionally, because of the new setup that we have here, where because of the new phase UI now, in terms of adding a term to your integration is just as simple as assigning it to a phase. It just further kind of eliminates the need for you to go into the admin panel or have to make any changes to your merge settings in the integrations hub. You'll still have access to the integrations hub to, see your merge settings, monitor your merge reports. You will still have access to all of those things. It's really just taking the new term setup process out of that hub and putting it directly into scheduling where you're working most of the time.
All right, have to give it a few more seconds for any questions to come in. Okay.
I guess really quick, just in case to give everybody an extra second. So just to reiterate, a link to the recording of this webinar will be shared with folks afterwards. You should be receiving an email from Cassie, the course dog, a little bit later with a link. We'll also have a link to this recording in our knowledge base. Your CSMs can also give you a link to this. They should have it handy in any upcoming check-ins that you may have. So if you can't find it in our knowledge base or in that email, you can always touch base with your CSM to get the link. Our help desk articles have also been updated to reflect these new changes. So you can always check out the knowledge base to get more information about the new timeline UI, the new phases UI. Additionally, you will be seeing some additional communications from us over the next week or so in preparation for this release to production on February 5th. So stay on the lookout for emails from Cassie because we'll be sending out hopefully kind of a enhanced feature spotlight that's a bit more concise, a bit more clear about any action items, which will have links to videos, a link to this webinar, things like that. So stay on the lookout for those comms too. Oh, and really quick, I see a question from Anne. How do you remove a phase from a term? My setup requires a phase per term once it's selected. So there are two ways that you could remove a phase from a term. One is, I believe you can do it with future actions, which are now becoming timeline items. Alternatively, if you go into the term in your settings and you go into that phases drop down field where you could pick a phase, it seems a little crazy, so bear with me. But if you click into that and backspace, that will remove the phase that's assigned to that term. So that's the way that you can remove a term from a phase as well.
Okay. Well, thank you everybody for all the questions and for joining. We appreciate it as always. And to reiterate one more time what Katelyn said, if you have any questions, reach out to your CSM, check out the knowledge base, just let us know how we can help and someone will be happy to do so.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, y'all.